Back again for another video. On today's topic, we'll be talking about the body and the mind. And I'm going to reiterate some things, but I'm going to have the conversation with you all that I had with my children. I told them very frankly, because this is in reference to their mother, I told them very frankly that what I'm teaching you, people my age don't really understand. So if you grasp and you learn what I'm teaching you at a very young age, then you'll be leagues ahead of anyone that will be your age at all points in time. So they listen in very closely. My son is very in tune with being ahead of the competition. My daughter, she's like, good knowledge. She's intelligent as well, though. But nonetheless, I had this conversation about the body and mind with my son and my daughter. And I was telling them about this in reference to me having to pull them out of school today. Well, I had to pull them out of school because me and my ex, we share 50-50 custody, right? And I pulled them out of school because their mother called me earlier today, and she's like, well, I had a Halloween party, and, I invited a few people over, and come to find out, some of the people that I invited over had positive COVID tests. So I was wondering if you would be able to pick the children up, and I guess we can go from there. And once again, I'm like, sure, whatever, because this is my week anyways. But nonetheless, this is all her responsibility. But I don't sweat it. She'll pay it back on the other end, as usual. But anyways, when it comes to the conversation that I had with my children on the way to taking them to their mothers after I explained to the school what happened, and I explained to my children what happened. My son, he is very pessimistic when it comes to some of the things that his mother does. And he is coming into his masculinity. Because it is obviously seeing something wrong with the balance that's supposed to be in play. But anyways, when it comes to the conversation, I told him, like, look, I know these things sometimes don't make sense. They understood the party, and my son, he was kind of upset because he loves spending time at his dad's house. My daughter, she's kind of the same way, but she doesn't want to admit it. It's the reason into the real reason for her. She's like, I'll come over, but I'm not going to stay long, and she'll stay like all of the time. But anyways, so she, my son, my daughter, I explained to him, like I said, that, people, I started off, I said, so there's a difference between the mind and the body. And I asked him, I was like, because I've never had this conversation with them before. I said, what do you think the difference between the mind and the body is? And, they gave me their opinions of this. They said, well, your mind is your mind and your body is your body. And I say, yeah, and then they go into explaining, there's things that you do with your mind that you don't do with your body, and etc. And I said, yeah, y'all are pretty close. I was like, but I'm gonna hip you to a little game here. There's clearly a difference between the mind and the body. They have points where they are tied together. This is the consciousness where they're tied together. But anyways, when it comes to the mind and the body, I said, the body, it doesn't feel pain. It goes through discomfort. Yes, the mind does get uncomfortable at times with certain things and aspects, but it doesn't necessarily experience any pain. The mind experiences grief. It can experience sadness, pretty much the emotions. The mind can experience these things, and the body is what plays them out in the form of, losing hair, hypertension, weight loss or gain. These things are in response to the things that the mind goes through. But the mind does not feel pain. Only the body feels pain. And the mind is separate from the body because the mind, if you, and I told him, even the brain is a part of the body. If you cut off a piece of a person's brain, do they lose their mind? Not always. Sometimes there's an altering to their mind because the inputs are kind of messed up or whatever the case may be. But nonetheless, their mind is still the same. It doesn't change. It's just the way that they perceive it because of the trauma or damage or precision cuts that happens to the brain can sometimes alter the way the mind views the world, right? Because it's the brain that is the connection to the mind, right? So I explained to them, yes, the brain and the mind are very separate. And how we know this is that people have gone through traumatic experiences, physical injuries, where they have physically lost pieces of their brain, but yet their personality still is intact. Who they are is still intact. But sometimes that is not always the case. You can alter points of the brain and something happens in the way that the mind cannot perceive it. Or the mind just simply vanishes from the physical brain itself. And we see this, potentially or specifically with brain dead people. We see this all the time where the body is clearly alive, but there's nobody home, right? My daughter calls it a vacant house. Thought that was funny. But anyway, when it comes to the mind and the brain, that is how the mind and the brain, or the mind and the body, that's how I explain to them its difference, because there are certain things that can happen to the brain and the mind will still be as it is. It doesn't go anywhere. And we can't say that it is in a centralized place. We know that it's not in your leg. We know that it's not in your arms. We know that it's not in your heart. We know that it's not in any of your extremities, your intestines, or anything like this, because people have lost these things and they have maintained their mind. People have lost their arms, people have lost their limbs and all these things, and they have maintained their mind. So we know the mind is not located there. But when things start to happen to the brain, and there's not any specific region, people think that it's around the amygdala area, somewhere up in there where the mind is located. But there have been traumatic things that have happened to the brain where people have lost portions of their brain, but yet their mind is still intact. So we don't know exactly where the brain is, right? But due to those physical things being altered on the body, we know that the mind is separate from the body, simply put, right? I said all that to say this. But then I go on to tell them there are desires of the mind that are very different of the body. Sometimes they're intertwined, sometimes, but rarely. You can easily make the distinction between the two. And I said, the desires of the body is to be lazy. It doesn't want to do work. It wants to get fat. It loves sugar. It loves all these things that the mind obviously knows that is bad for them. And, I'm explaining all this stuff to them in a 20-minute conversation. It's like 15-minute drive to their mother's house from where I was. And I say to them, your mom is still operating from her body. But that was towards the end. Let me not speed it up. Let me tell the story. Okay. I said, there are things that your body wants that your mind knows is clearly not good for it. And there are things that your body doesn't want that your mind know is good for it. For instance, like vegetables, eating healthy, practicing actual fasting. Fasting can have an effect on the mind because it alters the inputs of the body, the sensories, right? The way you process information, the calories needed in order to think, the water that you need in order to maintain homeostasis within your body, these things, the food, everything, so it can have a alteration on the mind in the way that it perceives the reality. But it does not necessarily alter the mind. The mind is something that is everlasting. The only way that, and people might not understand that because they say, well, people are crazy, people are this, people are that. That's because their inputs are wrong on their body. Usually they have a chemical imbalance, or they have all these physical things. There's rarely anything wrong with the actual mind of a person, unless that was just the way they were built. For instance, there are people who've done atrocious things throughout the histories who just had a mind that was built that way, regardless of what the state of their body was, right? So we can't generally say that everyone has a proper mind, but nonetheless, we can generally assume that due to how the mind works and its proper function, that everyone ain't on that BS, right? You know what I'm saying? But nonetheless, once again, when it comes to the mind, it doesn't really alter. It is the body that alters, which then gives a different perception of how the mind understands reality, because it is the mind that is not here. It's only the actual body, the physical body, that is here. And people might not understand that, but I would ask you, what color is the mind? What does it smell like? What does it look like? What does it sound? What does the mind sound like? What does it feel like? You can't explain to me these things. Anything that you cannot perceive with your 5 senses is intangible. Anything, no matter what it is, even the mind. And since the mind is intangible, we know that it's tied somewhere to the actual brain. We don't know where. Nobody's ever seen it. You know what I'm saying? It's an intangible thing. The body is the controller. Once again, I said to my daughter, the body is like a house. I was like, if I walk into my house, does it mean that I am now my house? And she says, no. I was like, that's no different than the mind being inside the body. The body is nothing but a house for the mind. And she understood that. And that's why she said, when I brought up the point where I said, people have been still alive technically, but their mind has no activity in their brain, none. And she said, it's like a vacant house then. And I was like, yes, exactly. It's exactly like a vacant house. All the lights are on, the utilities are running, but no one is home, right? That's exactly how the mind works when it has left the body, but the body still remains in existence and functionality, meaning that it is alive, right? But anyways, so I go on to say, there are things that your body don't want to do. For instance, your mind understands that your body needs to work out. Your mind also understands that your body does not eat that extra piece of cake. But for some reason, you eat that extra piece of cake and you don't work out. And I asked them, I said, why do you think that is? And they say, well, because you don't want to. I was like, who doesn't want to? If you understand that that's the right thing to do, then why don't you do it? Well, because exercising isn't always fun. Oh, so now we're getting somewhere. You're saying to me that the disciplining of the body is not always fun, but your mind understands that that's necessary in order to remain healthy, and that you don't eat that extra piece of cake, right? And I said, this is the problem that most people have, is that they let their bodies be in charge of the mind. They let their bodies tell them what the mind should be doing. They let the bodies dictate how much it wants to take in. The body is very lazy. The body is a gluttonous. It is always seeking pleasure. The mind is not. The mind is delayed gratification. The body is instant gratification, because you can eat that ice cream, but what does it do for your mind? It does nothing for your mind. Not saying that the mind cannot experience some level of gratification, because remember, it is delayed. You reading your favorite book or watching your favorite movie, it's not instant that you get to the gratifying parts that tickle your mind, right? That entertain your mind. Those things are delayed in response or in compared to how the body exists in its own gratification. Sex itself is gratifying. Eating sugar is gratifying. Having adrenaline rushes, is very gratifying to the body. These are all chemical related things though. The mind does not work on chemicals. It works on intelligence. It works on the emotions. It works on the intangible things, remember? Because the intangible are the things that are pushed through the body. The body is actually very stupid in regards to comparison to the brain, to the mind. It's not unintelligent, right? It has some level of intelligence to it. It can poop, It loves food. It can tell you when it's hungry. It can do all these things. And people think it's strange that I talk about the body in such a way like it's some kind of dog or something. But essentially, the reason why I talk about it that way is because I recognize that my body is very separate from me. The desires of my body are not the desires of my mind. It's only people who have not reached the level of maturity who don't understand this. And that's exactly where I brought in their mother. I was like, she had this party knowing that there is a such thing as a virus out there that is hurting people, that is debilitating people, that is causing people's lives to be forever altered. And yet she wants to please her body, because this isn't necessarily a mind thing. What exactly does the mind gain from having a party? Nothing much. Social interaction, I guess, maybe, because it can be sometimes depressing. Your body doesn't become depressed. Your mind becomes depressed. But it can be sometimes depressing to be isolated. But is that not a good exchange for the safety of your family? But there are other things that are necessarily involved in her life. Once again, I equate this to a immature mind, where the body is more mature than the actual mind is. That's in comparison when I say immature, because a person can have a mature mind and a mature body for their age, but a lot of people have an immature mind compared to the age of their bodies. And this is not what I consider an adult. I consider an adult who has a matured mind. This is a mind that can overpower the desires of the body and rationalize what is appropriate for the mind to make ultimate decisions on of what the body should be doing. That's how I look at it. But once again, I said to my children, for you to be this young and me to be explaining this to you, you may not understand. But the quicker you grasp this concept, the faster you will be able to mature into adult, even though you may have an immature body. Because I will keep feeding you knowledge. I will keep telling you what the truth of existence is, so that you can no longer have those questions and focus on what you want to do with your life. Because I spent many, many years learning the philosophies of existence. I read books and, I watch videos and I do this and I do this, and it's very time consuming. I have long, lengthy conversations about philosophy of life, just so I can pass it along to the people who need it, right? And in this case, it's definitely my children, because they need to understand why some things that they see happen. And a lot of people would say, oh, that's just the personality, or that's just how that person is. But no one will ever tell the accurate truth, is that they're letting their bodies run the mind. But anyways, like, comment, and share. Check me out on Facebook. Check me out on Patreon. I am putting together a few more videos for the Patreon. I think I should have those up by this weekend. But we'll see what happens. Yeah. I have an editor now that can edit my videos. So, and I'm going to include some of the ideas from the editor, and we'll go from there, and we'll see what we can come up with as far as a new way to see and approach the channel in regards to the entertainment portion of it. But anyways, oh yeah, and I did see that comment about going live. So I was thinking about doing a couple live shows, but I'm not a really long, well, don't let me lie. My conversation is very thoughtful. Sometimes I take pauses, and sometimes I have to think about things, because I'll be approached with maybe a new thought in my head, and I say, I wonder how far down the rabbit hole I should go on that. So that's the reason why I don't necessarily do live streams that often. I mean, I used to. As you can see, I have a few live streams in my catalog, but I may get back on it. I may do a few. I have other things that soak up a lot of time, and I think I could possibly get a few live streams in there. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, this has been a Wolf and Better Clothes. May you have a good day, and of course, as you definitely understand what you should do about this, you should definitely have a good day. And may peace, of course, be with you.